What really happened to the last of the Denisovans? Scientists on the hunt for the Denisovans have made a startling discovery in the jungles of island Southeast Asia. In fact, our mysterious cousins may have mated with modern humans as recently as 15,000 years ago in New Guinea, which means they survived much later than the Neanderthals in Europe. A journey to the heart of New Guinea's tribal homeland sheds new light on the mystery, but first some backstory. Michael Rockefeller was 23 years old, the privileged son of New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller, 7 months into the adventure of a lifetime that had transformed him from clean-cut student to bearded photographer and art collector. One moment his boat was being tossed by the waves, and the next he and his Dutch companion were clinging to an overturned hull. And then Rockefeller had swum for shore and vanished. No trace of him was ever found, despite a 2-week search involving ships, airplanes, helicopters, and thousands of locals prowling the coasts and jungle swamps. The fact that such a simple, ordinary thing had happened to him makes a simple boat trip feel all the more real. There would be no foreboding music, one bad wave and you'd be clinging to a boat in the middle of nowhere. The official cause of his death was drowning, but there had long been a multitude of rumors. He'd been kidnapped and kept prisoner. He'd gone native and was hiding out in the jungle. He'd been consumed by sharks. He'd made it to shore, only to be killed and eaten by the local headhunters. The story had grown, become mythical. Only in the mid-1950s had a few Dutch missionaries and government officials begun pacifying the locals, but even by 1961 many had never seen a Westerner, and intervillage warfare and headhunting remained common. Now this is wild and somehow more remote country than what I have ever seen before, he wrote. In many ways, the tribal world at the time was a mirror image of every taboo of the West. They killed their neighbors, and they hunted human heads and ate human flesh. There was their world, and there was the kingdom of the ancestors across the seas, and an in-between world, and all were equally real. No death just happened. Even sickness came at the hand of the spirits because the spirits of the dead person were jealous of the living and wanted to linger and cause mischief. The headhunters lived in a dualistic world of extremes, of life and death, where one balanced the other. Only through elaborate sacred feasts and ceremonies and reciprocal violence could sickness and death be kept in check by appeasing and chasing those ancestors to the land beyond the sea. Expert woodcarvers in a land without stone, the headhunters crafted ornate shields, paddles, drums, canoes and ancestor poles, embodying the spirit of an ancestor. The poles were 20-foot-high masterpieces of stacked men interwoven with crocodiles and praying mantises and other symbols of headhunting. The skull nourishes the initiate's growth, even as he takes the victim's name and becomes him. It was through that story that men learned how to headhunt and how to butcher a human body and how to use that skull to keep life flowing into the world. Anything outside of the tangible immediacy of what the headhunters could see had to come from that spirit world. It was the only comprehensible explanation. An airplane was called a passing over canoe of the spirits. White men came from the land beyond the sea, the same place the spirits lived, and so must be super beings. New Guinea is, in its way, a perfect place. Everything you could possibly need is here. It's teeming with shrimp and crabs and fish and clams. In the jungle there are wild pig, the furry, a possum-like cuscus, and the ostrich-like cassowary. And sago palm, whose pith can be pounded into a white starch and which hosts the larvae of the Capricorn beetle, both key sources of nutrition. The rivers are navigable highways. Crocodiles 15 feet long prowl their banks, and jet-black iguanas sun on uprooted trees. There are flocks of brilliant red and green parrots. Hornbills with 5-inch beaks and blue necks. And secrets, spirits, laws and customs, born of men and women who have been walled off by ocean, mountains, mud and jungle for longer than anyone knows. Here it's hard to know where the water begins and the land ends, as the ocean's 15-foot tides inundate the coast of southwest New Guinea, an invisible swelling that daily slides into this flat swamp and pushes against great outflowing rivers. It is a world of knee-deep mud and mangrove swamps stretching inland, a great hydroponic terrarium. Until 50 years ago, there were no wheels here. No steel or iron, not even any books. there's still not a single road or automobile. In its 10,000 square miles, there is but one airstrip, and outside of the main town, there isn't a single cell tower. And until 15,000 years ago, it was home to the last of the Denisovans, who mated with these headhunters.
You literally cannot deny the local customs. You cannot deny the local customs. One thing you must do is adhere to the local customs.
Indeed, genomic data from New Guinea suggests a late mixing of archaic group with modern humans. Some of the last Denisovans may have intermingled with modern humans in mountainous New Guinea or on nearby islands. Papua New Guinea was never connected with mainland Southeast Asia during the low sea levels of the Ice Ages, due to deep maritime straits, although the island was connected to mainland Australia. The elusive Denisovans, the extinct cousins of Neanderthals, are known from only the scraps of bone they left in Siberia's Denisova cave in Russia and the genetic legacy they bequeathed to living people across Asia. A study of that legacy in people from New Guinea now suggests that, far from being a single group, these mysterious humans were so diverse that their populations were as distantly related to each other as they were to Neanderthals. Not much is known about the mysterious Denisovans. Their only physical remnants discovered so far are a few teeth and fragments of bone unearthed in a cave in Siberia. But DNA analyses have found that the Denisovans must have lived much further east and south of Siberia too. Genetic evidence suggested our species interbreed with Denisovans at least twice, in Asia and Australasia, and that the genomes of people from Papua New Guinea may be up to 5% Denisovans. In another startling suggestion, the study implies one of those groups may have survived and encountered modern humans as recently as 15,000 to 30,000 years ago, tens of thousands of years later than researchers had thought. A late surviving lineage of Denisovans could have interbred with Homo sapiens in Southeast Asia, says paleoanthropologist Chris Stringer of the Natural History Museum in London. Researchers already knew that living people from a vast area spanning the Philippines and New Guinea to China and Tibet have inherited 3% to 5% of their DNA from Denisovans. The leading scenario had suggested that as modern humans swept out of Africa, they first encountered Neanderthals and mated with them. Hence, all people in Europe and Asia now have 1% to 3% of their DNA from Neanderthals. The ancestors of Asians then encountered Denisovans 50,000 years ago or so and acquired 3% to 5% of their DNA from them. For the new study, an international team analyzed the complete genomes of 161 people from 14 groups in Indonesia and Papua New Guinea. In the DNA of 60 people from New Guinea, population biologists found an unexpected twist. The first Denisovan DNA discovered, from the Siberian cave, comes from a single population, which geneticists have labeled D0. But Papuans carry DNA from at least two other Denisovan populations, called D1 and D2. When the team members analyzed the DNA with 3 statistical methods, they found that the 2 additional sources of Denisovan DNA came from populations so distantly related that they had diverged more than 283,000 years ago. And the D2 population is most distant from the Siberian Denisovans, splitting off roughly 363,000 years ago. That makes those 2 populations almost as distantly related to each other as they are to Neanderthals. We used to think of Denisovans as a single group, but the D2 group might even need a new name. The D1 DNA isn't found in people outside New Guinea, and it's found on large chunks of chromosome that haven't been mixed over time, suggesting it entered the modern human genome from 15,000 to 30,000 years ago. Moreover, there's reason to think it happened at the most recent end of that range. The genes from the second interbreeding are much more common in people living in the Papua New Guinea mainland than in people living on nearby islands, suggesting the mixing happened with the mainlanders after the islanders' ancestors had left. Thus, a late group of Denisovans survived in the remote mountains of New Guinea or islands of Indonesia and mated with modern humans, but New Guineans had a separate source of Denisovans DNA than people in East Asia, suggesting at least 2 mixing events. Another interesting trait of some Melanesians is their blonde hair, which raises the question, could the Denisovans have been blonde? Whatever happened on New Guinea, it seems Denisovans were a far-flung and diverse group that mixed with modern humans frequently. We humans are incredibly adaptable, and the evidence for that is in our DNA. We have survived and thrived around the world, even in extreme environments, not just because of our intelligence and culture, but because of our biology. We already know that, after Homo sapiens first migrated out of Africa, our species repeatedly interbred with a number of now extinct hominin species, including the Neanderthals and Denisovans. The signs are in our DNA today. All people of non-African descent carry some Neanderthal DNA, while some Asian people also have Denisovans DNA.